Hello everyone, AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink, and for today's cards I am showing the new Simon Says Stamp Stripes card wrap. I had so many of you requesting that I show how this die works. So to make it a dual folding like wrap card, I have half a sheet of cardstock here. So this is 4 1/4 by 11 inches. And I just used a T-square ruler and I drew a line onto the cardstock with a pencil. It doesn't really matter where the line is as long as there's enough space to cut the die. And then from that line, I measured 4 1/4 inches. And I'm going to draw my second line. So that gives me a guide as to where to place the longest side of this die, because this die cuts on where it's sitting right now. It cuts on the two left sides there. And then the third side, the longest side, it just scores, and that's what creates your wrap. So I did this twice on 2 different colors of cardstock. I drew my pencil line, I measured 4 1/4 inches, and then I drew a second pencil line. So now to die cut these, I'm going to line up that longest, basically the side with the holes, is where the scoring line is, and I'm going to line that up with one of the pencil lines. Run that through my Big Shot machine. You can see it die cut that fun triangle shaped with the little stripe windows. And now I'm going to do that to the other side of the same piece. Line that up with the pencil line. Run that through my machine. And now I basically have a 4 1/4 inch little square card base with these 2 triangle flaps, just like so. So I'm going to do this another time with that green cardstock. So the exact same process. So I'm going to line up the die with the pencil line. I'm going to die cut it with my Big Shot machine. And then I'm going to die cut it a second time on the other side. So really, once you do this, once you've kind of figured it out, it's quite simple to use. It's one of those ones that you need to see it in action. It's like, oh, okay. Because even when I first got this die, I was like, I don't quite get, I knew what it was meant for, but I was like, I couldn't see it. And then once I started playing with it, it's like, oh, okay, this is how it works. So for both of the green and the gray card bases, I did all the measuring, and then lining things up with the pencil lines, etc. And then because I just, in my head, I don't know why, I wanted to see if I could just do it with just basically scraps of cardstock. So I have some AUDREY blue cardstock here. I'm going to run this die through twice, just making sure that there's about roughly, not quite 1/4 inch. I should have made sure there was like a 1/4 inch. It would just made it easier past the scoring line, just so I've got a little bit of room to adhere. And I ran this through a machine, and then I just used my scissors to trim the little bits off of each end down. And then I've got that little triangle like card wrap piece with some extra cardstock past the scoring line. And I'll get to that in a minute, like how I, use that to actually create my third card. So I've got my card bases here, and like I said, they're 4 1/4 inches square. So I'm going to fold over those striped card wraps, and I'm just using my Teflon bone folder to really press that crease down. And I did it with the blue ones too, but that's when my camera battery died the first time. Yeah, I had a lot of footage when I was making these. I was all over the place. I had so many ideas and I didn't know when to stop. So for my actual cards, I have some Ranger watercolor paper here. I have the full sheets. It's the same as the distressed watercolor paper I always show, but those smaller pieces are 4 1/4 by 5.5. This is the actual full 8.5 by 11 sheets that I cut down to 4 inches by 8 inches. So these are making 4-inch square cards. And these are going to fit inside my little card wraps. So I've got 3 of them here, and I'm going to stamp them with images from the new, from the Rooftops stamp set. Again, millions of ideas for this set. I absolutely love it. So I'm using my mini MISTI here because I need to stamp these, especially this one. This image with all of the buildings is so detailed, and I'm stamping on the textured side of this watercolor paper, and those like tiny little window images and whatnot, it's harder to get the detail stamped. So I just stamped it multiple times using VersaFine ONYX black ink. I did the second on the second card and I messed up. So I just flipped it around and stamped on the other side because I plan on adhering these to those card wrap bases. So you're not going to see the side that I messed up on. So after I did the 2 with that image, I decided to do my third with the mountain image from that set. So same thing, I'm inking up the mountains, stamping it onto the textured side of my watercolor cardstock here. And then I ended up deciding to mask the mountains so I could stamp a whole row of them. So I just put a couple pieces of Post-it notes right over the image, and without even re-inking it up, closed the lid of my MISTI, made enough of an impression that I could quickly trim these out, which took like 2 seconds because they're just triangle shapes. So masked off the little mountain range there, and then I used a piece of my grid transparency that I always use usually to line up stamps. I just used that to protect my card front so I didn't have to clean off that stamp since I'm going to re-ink it more than once. So moved my card base, lined up my stamp, closed the lid of my MISTI. Now I can pull out that acetate sheet. My little mountain range is masked, so I can ink up the stamp it on the inside, and then I did this a third time. I moved the card base over to the right quite a bit. It's hanging off the edge of my MISTI. That's fine. Everything's still going to stamp just fine. And had my acetate sheet in place, repositioned that stamp, remove the acetate sheet, and then I'm just going to ink up that little side so I can continue my little mountain range across the front of this card. So now that I've got everything stamped, I can watercolor these, and I've super sped up the watercoloring in this video. Otherwise, this video would have been insanely long. This is sped up like 800%, or it starts I think at 400%, and then I speed it up even more. But I did really basic, simple watercoloring. I'm using my little Sakura Koi palette. I just pulled it out because I hadn't used it in a while and thought, why not? So to do my background first, I just used clean water, and I painted it above the little mountaintops here, and then kind of let it fade off towards the top of my little card. And then I just added some blue watercolor, and like I said, let it kind of fade off towards the top of the card. I didn't do a perfect fade. I was okay with there being like a little bit of a line. I just kind of wanted, you know, I needed some color for the background. So after I did that, dried that quickly with my heat tool, and then I just went on and watercolored the mountains themselves. I just used green. I started with just the green that had been dried in the palette. So just painted that on, and then I darkened it up, added a bit, and then added some even darker green, and just kind of started dotting it on, and I wasn't holding it here. I was kind of zoned out, and it started like, my piece is like getting away from me. So grabbed it, put it back down, you know, kept dotting in that darker green, and then dried it again. Once everything was dry, I took a little bit of the black, and I had watered it down quite a bit, so it's very light gray, and just added that to the little mountaintops. Once everything was completely dry with this piece, I got my splatter fix. I pulled out my Copic Opaque White, and I'm going to water that down a little bit onto an acrylic block. So just added the water first this time because I planned on doing more watercoloring, so I didn't want to make my watercolor cups all muddied with the Copic Opaque White. So I've got a little bit of water on my acrylic block. I pick up a little bit of that white paint, mix it up with the water just to thin it out, and then I start splattering it rather liberally on the card. So I started by just tapping it against my finger, and doing it this way creates larger splatter. And then I start flicking the paintbrush against the edge of the acrylic block. This creates a much finer splatter, and you have a little bit more control as to where it's going to go. So of course I used a lot of it and splattered it all over the whole card front basically, and it got everywhere. But I clean this up immediately. Like, I go and wash off my block, I wash out my brush, and I wipe down my work surface, and it's good to go. So I set that aside to dry, and now I'm going to work on these ones with all of the buildings. And I'm going to do the same thing, except this time I find it's easier to flip this upside down so that I'm pulling the water and the watercolor towards me to create the background. It's just faster and easier, especially just going around these buildings. But again, still fairly simple because they're fairly straight lines. So I added the clean water first, and then I'd mixed together, you know, some blue, some purple, and some black to create kind of, I was thinking like a night sky sort of a color. This would look really gorgeous if you took the time to deepen it and add like layers and really you could turn it fabulous. But I was making 3 cards, I was doing 20 million things at once, and this was the most I could do. So I painted my background, same thing, kind of let it fade up a little bit towards the top, dried it with my heat tool. And then I just mixed basically black with a little bit of blue and a little bit of purple, and used those to paint all these buildings. And sometimes I would use less water to get a darker color. I would add more water to make it, you know, lighter. And I would just skip around and paint each building so that they weren't all wet and running into each other. And then once I had all my little buildings painted, I'm going to dry this again with my heat tool, so that once it's dry, I can just go in and add just a little bit of yellow to all of these windows. Just going in and quickly dotting it, that just doesn't take long at all. I wasn't planning on adding splatter to this, but as I was getting near the end of it, I was like, this could look really nice if I masked off the buildings, added splatter, and made it look like stars, because I was going for a night sky theme. So that's what I did. I stamped the building image onto a couple pieces of the same post-it paper there so I could mask off these buildings. Everything's dry at this point, of course. And then grabbed my Copic Opaque white and just same thing, thinned it out with a little bit of water, and this time just did a finer splatter. I still added a ton, but a much finer splatter. So added that, and then I can remove the mask from my building so that the splatter is just on the background, like I said, to look more like a night sky. So I'm going to set that one aside, and then I'm going to finish watercoloring my third piece, which is the same just setup of buildings. This time I went for more lighter colors, kind of daytime. This is the one I'm going to use on the Audrey blue card base. So the sky color, I was kind of mimicking that color by mixing like blue and green together. And then the exact same idea, flipping this over, so I was pulling the color towards me. I find that works a lot better. And it also works too if you put this on an angle, like if you actually take the time to tape it down to a hardboard, etc., and you could put it on an angle and the color just naturally pulls down. Again, I was too lazy to do that this time. So dried my background, and then with this one I went in with some purples and some greens and some blues to just kind of give it a more just kind of bright and cheerful and happy set of colors. And once I got these all filled in and then dried, I went in again with the yellow and added that to all the windows. And no splatter on this one. No splatter, because it is daytime and I didn't want to make it look like it was snowing. I'm tired of snow. I want spring to be here. So now that I've got all of my bases done and my card fronts done, I want to add sentiments. And that's one thing I really love about this set. There's this fun speech bubble and all these like fun sentiments. So I grabbed a scrap of black cardstock, and I used my anti-static powder tool, and I stamped the speech bubble 3 times, and then I stamped 3 different sentiments from the Rooftops stamp set onto this, all with Simon Says clear embossing ink. And then I'm going to coat all of these with white embossing powder, and I'm going to melt that with my heat tool, and then I'm going to die cut them with the little coordinating speech bubble die. So now that I've got everything die cut, I'm going to adhere all these sentiments flat to these cards. I want to make sure everything's flat because there's going to be the triangle like striped card wrap and then another piece to hold everything down. So you definitely don't want to have too much dimension because it makes things harder to hold, to hold together. So after I've got my sentiments adhered, I'm now applying adhesive to the back of these card bases. So applying a generous amount of adhesive so I can adhere these. You don't have to adhere them. These could just sit in the base and then they would slide out. That's usually, I think, how these are kind of meant to be is, you open up the card flaps and then the inner card slips out. But I decided to adhere mine because I just like that better. Plus this one that I messed up, it needed to be adhered so that nobody knows that it's there. So it's, again, personal preference. I prefer to keep them all adhered and it all one piece. But you can do whatever you want. So I adhered the second piece into the gray card base. And then for the blue, I've got a piece of 4 1/4 by about 4 1/8 inch of cardstock here. And I'm just adding some 1/8 inch score tape to the inside flap here of these 2 pieces that I die cut earlier. And then I'm going to adhere those to either side. I have the base set up so it is 4 1/8 inch wide. Just because once you add these flaps, it kind of widens it out a little bit more. All these cards I would put into an A2 sized envelope. One meant for a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch card. You could use a square envelope if you want. Again, personal preference. But if a square card is anything smaller than 4 1/4 inches square, which these are 4 1/4 exactly, I just stick them in an A2 card because they just fit perfectly. So I adhered those flaps to that piece of cardstock. So when you do it this way, you do have like the little seams on the back. Again, personal preference. This would work though if you wanted to die cut, pattern paper or specialty paper, and you don't have pieces that are long enough. This is a way around it. Obviously, if you have full pieces of cardstock, it's easier in my mind. It's almost easier to just do it like I did in the beginning with the scoring, the pencil lines and the scoring, etc. Or pencil lines and lining it up and let the die, it all be one piece. But this does work if you wanted, your base to be just plain cardstock, but you wanted the flaps to be, say, glitter paper or pattern paper, anything like that. This is a way around it. So for the insides of all my cards, I'm using all new dies from Simon, all these new word dies. I kind of tried to choose words from the stamp set that would go well with these sentiments. And I die cut them all from black cardstock, and then I'm adhering them to the insides of these cards with some multi-medium matte adhesive. So the first one, the congrats one, I used again my T-square ruler just to get everything kind of lined up as straight as possible. And then I adhered the get well soon, and then on this last one, I'm using the new happy birthday wafer die. And adhering the middle of that birthday first, so it's lined up, and then adhering the other two parts of it on either side, so it's kind of centered within my card base here. And using my reverse tweezers as much as possible, it just helps, especially when die cutting anything or adhering anything small, because, you know, my fingers get in the way and I can't see where things are and I want to get them placed straight. So reverse tweezers are a godsend. I have 2 pairs and I should probably get 10 more because they always grow legs and walk off. So as a final step with these, it's, again, personal preference. You could use twine or ribbon or string to tie your cards closed. You know, you could wrap that around, or you could, you know, use it just on the points and tie it closed. I thought about that, but I wanted to add another sentiment to this. So I pulled out some vellum and I cut it into 1-inch strips. These are like 1 inch by 11 inches, or yeah, because it's an 8.5 by 11 sheet. So they're 1 inch by 11 inches. And I use my anti-static powder tool on them. And then on the middle of each one, I stamped shouting from the, and you can choose with this set, either rooftops or mountaintops. So I stamped the rooftops twice, so shouting from the rooftops on 2 of them, and then shouting from the mountaintops on 1. And I stamped that with the Simon Says clear embossing ink. And I thought about heat embossing these with white, but in the end chose to use black embossing powder for these, just so it stood out a little bit more. So I just used some Wow Primary Ebony embossing powder and then melted all of those with my heat tool, which took no time at all because when you're heat embossing on vellum, it melts really, really quickly. So after I've got everything done, I'm going to wrap these around my card fronts. You don't want to wrap them really, really tight. If you wrap them too tight, they're not going to slip on and off very easily at all, and you're more than likely going to tear it. So you just want it wrapped around enough that it's going to hold things in place, but not so tight that it can't move up and down and like slip off the, like easily slip off the card. So I'm just wrapping these around and adhering the ends and then cutting the ends off. I'm not concerned in the least that you can see the adhesive on the back through the vellum, because that's just the way vellum is. Doesn't matter what anyone says. You can always see adhesive through vellum. I've had a lot of people asking me about, you know, there's the vellum tape and the like adhesives that are meant for vellum. I can still see them. So when it's something like this, I don't care at all because it's the back. I'm not worried about it. And these are such fun cards that it's worth it when you can see that little bit of adhesive on the back. So that is how you use the Stripes card wrap. These cards were a lot of fun to make, a lot of steps, but like I said, once you do them, everything kind of makes sense and they're just fun. It's just a little extra something. So you just slip off that wrap, open the flaps, you got your card, and you can write something to the recipient. So this is part of a blog hop, so check out my blog post linked below the video because there is a giveaway, there's tons of inspiration, and a bunch of other designers participating. Thank you all so much for watching, subscribing, thumbs upping, and commenting on my videos, and I will see you all very soon in the next one. Bye!